Hello everyone and welcome to part 2010 of our Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG history series. Starting the year off would be the January 2010 issue of Shonen Jump magazine featuring none other than the Egyptian god card Obelisk the Tormentor. Now legal for tournament play, Obelisk would more or less retain the effect it was famous for. You still needed 3 monsters to summon it, its summon could not be stopped, and the card could not be targeted by spell, trap or monster effects. Additionally, if it's special summoned, it goes to the graveyard at the end phase. Finally, you could tribute 2 monsters to destroy all monsters your opponent controlled, but the card could not declare an attack the turn it activated its effect. All in all, it was pretty much on par with the manga, which makes sense as it was the most straightforward of the god cards. Surprisingly, despite its heavy tribute summon cost, this card would see competitive play in Monarch builds. Moving on to February, we would see the release of Absolute Powerforce. This set wouldn't be a Powerforce to rock the game, but its additions to certain archetypes would be key in making them playable. In particular, Synchro, Gravekeeper and X-Saber decks would receive massive boosts. The set would further be boosted by generic cards such as Battle Fader and its ability to end battle phases when your opponent tried to attack you directly, cards of Consonance which let you send Tuna Dragon monsters such as the Right Stone of Legend to the graveyard to draw 2 cards, Consecrated Light to stop your opponent from playing with dark monsters, and finally Fiendish Chain that just turn off anything your opponent tried to play. Overall, it was a decent set. The next month would bring more significant releases of the game, as the Machina Mayhem Structure deck and Duelist Pack Collector Tins would bring new powerful cards to the format. Machina Fortress and Machina Gearframe would be the focus of machine decks going forward. Machina Fortress could special summon itself from the hand or graveyard by discarding machine monsters whose levels equaled 8 or more. A cool trick with Machina Fortress is that it could use itself as the level cost. On top of that, it had 2 very good floating effects. The first is that it allowed you to destroy 1 card your opponent controlled when it was destroyed by battle. Additionally, when it was targeted by a monster effect, you could discard a card from your opponent's hand in response. On its own, Machina Fortress is little more than a semi-oppressive beat stick, but what really made it good was Machina Gearframe. When Machina Gearframe was normal summoned, you could add 1 Machina monster from your deck to your hand. The searching utility of Gearframe made it the perfect starter for the deck. Furthermore, it was a union monster and could equip itself to another Machina monster you controlled. If a Machina Fortress equipped with Gearframe would be destroyed, the Gearframe would be destroyed first, protecting the fortress. Also included in Machina Mayhem was Scrap Recycler, a card that was used mainly for its ability to pitch a card from your deck to the graveyard. It was a decent effect, but it'd be a few years before we really saw this card at full power. The Duelist Pack Collector Tins would just contain reprints of the Yusei Duelist packs, but what really made them worthwhile was the inclusion of the promo card Starlight Road. Activate only when an effect is activated that will destroy 2 or more cards you control, negate the effect and destroy that card. Then, you can special summon 1 Stardust Dragon from your extra deck. In a format where Heavy Storm was legal, this was a really nice card to have, because it meant you didn't have to burn half your life points using Solemn Judgment anymore. It wasn't just Heavy Storm it protected from either, it could protect your monsters from Dark Hole, Judgment Dragon, all sorts of effects. Just keep in mind, if you summon Stardust Dragon with this card, and then tribute that Stardust Dragon to negate a card effect, the Stardust Dragon will not return to the field during the end phase, as it wasn't properly synchro summoned. Of all these new card releases, let's see how the Forbidden list has been impacted. Well, in March 2010, there were 0 moves to the Forbidden section, nothing was banned. But the Limited section has been very busy, 14 new cards limited, including Brionic, Lumina, Charge of the Light Brigade, Necro Gardener, Masuki, Allure, Chaos Sork, Destiny Draw, Foolish Burial, Tragodia, Burial from a Different Dimension, Magical Explosion, Mind Crush, and Necrophase. If you haven't figured that out, they were going after the Lightsworn decks and the Zombie decks, as they were just way too strong in the previous format. In Semi-Limited, we would see quite a few cards move up. Cyber Dragon, Dandelion and Demise would just be a few of the cards that were moved up from Limited. Also included in Semi-Limited was Honest, Treeborn Frog, Black Whirlwind, United We Stand, Skill Drain, Royal Oppression, and Royal Decree. Yep, this would be a format where you could have double Skill Drain and double Royal Oppression. They still weren't quite on that level yet. In Unlimited, we would see Mask of Darkness and Smashing Grounds come off the list altogether. April 2010 would be a significant month for the game, as it would see Edison host the last ever Shonen Jump Championship. Yep, the 75th Shonen Jump Championship tournament would be the last ever. Edison would be run by legendary innovator Jeff Jones, as he came to the tournament with his Quick Draw Dandy Warrior deck. The concept of the deck was simple enough. Dandelion had just gone to 2, Quick Draw Synchro was a very good card in the format, why not mash them together? By discarding Dandelions to the graveyard, you could get your tokens, summon your Quick Draw Synchron, and then Synchro summon into either a Drill Warrior, Junk Archer, Nitro Warrior, or Turbo Warrior. Add a further plant engine to that deck in the form of Lonefire Blossom and Debris Dragon, and you had a very good build for the time. Yu-Gi-Oh! At this time would be in a very slow format, and this just so happened to be one of the quicker decks out there. With no one else expecting the deck, Jeff Jones was able to take the tournament. Edison being the last Shonen Jump Championship wouldn't be the end of its importance on the game. In fact, it's left quite the legacy for itself. You see, Shonen Jump Edison was quite at the first tournament. There wasn't one dominant deck. If you look at the top cut for the tournament, there was a massive diversity in deck types. There was no one dominant deck. This brings us to the genesis of Edison Format. What is Edison Format? Simply put, everyone plays the game as if it is still April 2010 and that we're playing at Shonen Jump Edison. That means we're using the same rulings as Shonen Jump Edison, the same card pool as Shonen Jump Edison, any card released up to Absolute Powerforce, Machina Madness, or Duelist Pack Collector Tin is legal. That said, dual terminal cards are not legal in Edison Format, even though they had been technically released before Edison. They weren't legal back then, so why should they be legal now? In terms of game pace, it's quite similar to Go. Yeah, you do have decks such as Black Wings that can combo into a one-turn Synchro, but otherwise, it's not too different. A lot of decks will still do things like T-sets, still play one monster and then back row. If you're familiar with GOAT, Edison isn't a huge jump, you just have to familiarise yourself with the card pool and Synchro mechanic. GOAT format is very heavy on the power of spell cards. Edison format is much more balanced. Monsters, spells and traps are all more or less equally powerful. There's a very wide variety of strategies and decks in Edison format. So many that I couldn't even begin to list them all. You got Quick Draw Dandy Warrior, you got Stun decks, Hero variants, Zombie decks, Deep Sea Diva decks, Dragons, Machines, Plants, Light Swarms, the list just goes on and on. This format is very quickly growing in popularity. In fact, it might just be the second most popular alternative format now. More so than the 2011 Plant format, a format itself which has a lot of buzz around it. If you want to learn more about Edison Format, the places to go are edisonformat.com, Ed and Edison on YouTube for some amusing and hilarious replays with commentary, and Who Needs Meta if you prefer live duels. Edison Format would be short-lived, as just a few short weeks later we would see the release of the Shining Darkness. Whereas Edison was a slow format, this set would aim to speed the game up a little bit. Breeze the Sephir would be a nice addition to Blackwing decks that made them just a little bit faster at getting synchros out. Gen X Undyne would be a very welcome engine card in water decks, whilst Gen X Neutron would be a very welcome searcher in machine decks. Infernities would get a massive boost in this set thanks to the inclusion of Infernity Barrier and Infernity Launcher. Infernity Barrier would act as an archetypal Solemn Judgment, allowing you to negate any card your opponent played as long as you had an Infernity monster and no cards in your hand. Infernity Launcher was like a double monster reborn from Infernities. It allowed you to special summon 2 Infernity monsters from your graveyard. Spore was a level 1 plant monster that allowed you to banish another plant monster from your graveyard to special summon it. Its level would then be increased by the level of that plant monster. As tuners go, this was easily one of the best tuners in the game for a while. X-Saber Bogart Knight was a massive booster for the deck, as when normal summoned it allowed you to special summon another X-Saber monster from your hand, making synchro plays much more accessible. More important to the X-Saber archetype however would be X-Saber Dark Soul. There's a little trick with X-Saber Dark Soul that we'll go over later, but let's just say for a while, this card was ruled in a way that made it absolutely broken. Finally, we had Ronin Totem, a card that allowed you to banish a fog monster from your graveyard to special summon it from the graveyard. We will also talk about this card later because it is also very broken in the right circumstances. Moving into the summer, we would see a new addition to the Hidden Arsenal sub-series. Hidden Arsenal 2 would bring more archetypal support to those Hidden Arsenal dual terminal archetypes, but more importantly, it would bring 3 very powerful cards to the game. Naturia Beast is a level 5 Earth Beast Synchro monster with 2200 attack and 1700 defense. It requires 1 Earth Tuner plus 1 or more non-tuner Earth monsters. While this card is face up on the field, you can send the top 2 cards of your deck to the graveyard to negate the activation of a spell card and destroy it. Not once per turn, can negate spells as many times as you have cards in your deck. Yep, this card is absolutely insane, and was played in any deck that could run it. Some decks would even change their builds just so they could run it. Mist Valley Apex Avian. When an effect is activated, you can select one face-up Mist Valley card you control, return that Mist Valley card to its owner's hand, negate the effect activation, and destroy the card whose effect was activated. Even at the time, this was a decent card, especially if you were playing a Mist Valley deck. But, like many cards released in this era, it would just become stronger as time goes on. Because once again, these cards are not once per turn. As long as you could keep putting Apex Avian on your field, it could keep being used to negate stuff. Duelist, Tiger King of the Ice Barrier. Once per turn, you can return any number of face-up cards you control to the owner's hand. For each card returned to the owner's hand by this effect, this card gains 500 attack until the end phase. Okay, on the face of it, the attack buff isn't that much of an impressive effect, but there's a reason why this card was feared. Bouncing cards back to your hand was a very good way to enable, what else, but infinite loops. While this card wouldn't go on to be as used or as popular as Naturia Beast, the self-bouncing effect was still a big enough issue that eventually they had to do something to address it. Now that we've seen the card releases, the scene has been set for a very busy summer of Yu-Gi-Oh! The Shonen Jump Championships had ended, replacing them would be the Yu-Gi-Oh! Championship Series, or, as it's better known, the RaiCS. RaiCS DC would come shortly after the release of the Shining Darkness. While X-Sabers wouldn't win the tournament, the deck did see an increase in representation, as did Infernity, which is unsurprising considering the power of the cards that were released in that set. Moving on into June, we would see half the top 8 spots at RaiCS Chicago go to X-Sabers. Infernity would win out that day, but it was obvious which deck people were playing. This brings us to July 2010, the United States World Championship Qualifier. This would be X-Saber's tournament, as it would go on to once again take half the top 8 spots and win the entire thing. This X-Saber build by Sean Montague would be the one to win the WCQ. The deck was pretty standard for what we'd expect of X-Sabers at the time. Rescue Cat was still being used in decks such as this to access X-Saber Airbellum, but more importantly was the actual X-Saber engine itself. But you see, back in July 2010, X-Saber Dark Soul worked a bit differently to what it does now. So let's read the card effect. If this card you control is sent to the graveyard, during the end phase, you can add one X-Saber monster from your deck to your hand. The ruling in 2010 was, you could search as many times as the same copy of Dark Soul had been sent to the graveyard. So, just looking at this deck list, it's running 2 copies of Gotham's Emergency Call. If you send a Dark Soul to the graveyard, then Emergency Call it back to the field and send it to the graveyard again, during the end phase, you would get to search off that one copy of Dark Soul twice. With 3 copies of Dark Soul in the deck, and with it being a beast type that could be searched by Rescue Cat, you could end up searching as many as 3, 4, maybe 5 or more cards during the end phase off multiple Dark Soul activations in the graveyard. Looking back at it from a modern perspective, it's crazy to think that they ruled it this way. But I suppose back in 2010, hard once per turns weren't really a thing, and there wasn't really a precedent set for this type of card design. Would X-Sabers have been able to win the WCQ without Dark Soul's busted ruling? It's hard to say, but on the day it was the deserved winner. But speaking of busted card effects, let's move on to the 2010 World Championships. This World Championship would take place from August 14th to August 15th in Long Beach, California. The tournament would be run by, and forgive my pronunciation here, Galileo de Oboldia from Panama. And what did he win the World Championship with, you may ask? None other than the dreaded, the feared, the infamous Frog FTK. Fear this deck, for it is one of the most consistent first turn kills in the history of the game. So here's how the combo worked. You'd use your swap Fogs to send Ronin Toad into the graveyard to set up your play. You would summon your Substitute along with other Fogs, and then tribute those Fogs to get more Fogs from your deck. You would keep tributing Fogs until you've tributed every single monster in your deck that could be summoned with Substitute. Then, once your graveyard was filled with Fogs, you would use Ronin Toad's effect to banish those Fogs from the graveyard to special summon itself. Then, if you had Mass Driver on the field, you would tribute those Ronin Toads with Mass Driver 20 times. By doing this, you would win the game. If that sounds stupid, it's because it was. But it worked. And if it works, it ain't stupid. 2010 is a hard World Championship to talk about, because there's not really a lot you can say about an FTK deck such as Frogs. But it also isn't helped by the fact that the deck lists for 2nd and 3rd place are missing. We know what they were playing, we just don't know what the decks were. So, if it's any consolation, here's the deck list for 4th place and 5th to 8th place, where we see Black Rings and Infernities. But yeah, not really much to say about that World Championship, it was a bit of an oddity. Releasing just before the World Championship but not legal for it was the Duelist Revolution. This set was actually a pretty big deal, if only for a select few cards. To start things off, we had Effect Failure. During your opponent's main phase, you can send this card from your hand to the graveyard to select one face-up effect monster your opponent controls, and negate the effects of that monster until the end phase. This is one of the most important Yu-Gi-Oh cards ever made. It very much popularized the use of hand traps because it was just so generic and so easy to use at any time. Even today, we are seeing this card commonly get used in top performing decks. Some could say that this card being introduced in hindsight was a bad thing, that it led Yu-Gi-Oh down a very slippery slope, but if we just take the card for what it was in a vacuum, it's an outstandingly good card. And it's a level 1 tuner to boot, one of the best levels a tuner card can be. Another power card in this set, and the card that people would be buying the set for, was Pot of Duality. Reveal the top 3 cards of your deck, add one of them to your hand, then shuffle the rest back into your deck. You can only activate one Pot of Duality per turn. You cannot special summon a monsters during the turn you activate this card. Now today, this card doesn't see any use because getting locked out of special summons for the turn is just not worth it under any circumstances. But during a time when the game was a lot slower, Pot of Duality was simply stupendous. It dug into your deck by 3 cards and then gave you whichever card you needed the most. Considering that many decks didn't look to actively special summon on their first turn back then, this was a really good starter card to have. Another powerful generic card that would debut in this set would be Solemn Warning. Pay 2000 life points to negate the summon of a monster or the activation of a spell card, trap card, or effect monster's effect that includes the effect that special summons a monsters, and destroy that card. Solemn Warning was in some ways a compromise to the limiting of the very powerful Solemn Judgment, but also the card could do things that Solemn Judgment simply could not. For a moment, let's just take an example of a card like Masuki. Solemn Judgment cannot negate Masuki's effect. If you banish Masuki from your graveyard, that zombie monster who's getting special summoned is going to hit the field no matter what. Solemn Judgment could not stop its summon because Masuki is a monster effect. It is not a summon, it is not a spell activation, and it's not a trap activation. Solemn Judgment covers those, but it does not stop Masuki. Solemn Warning would stop Masuki because the card's text includes the effect of special summoning a monster. Hilariously, this also allows Solemn Warning to stop all sorts of cards you wouldn't think it would, like Macrocosmos, because Macrocosmos also includes the effect of special summoning a monster. Duelist Revolution may have been a small set, but thanks to the inclusion of Effect Failure, Pot of Duality, and Solemn Warning, it would be one of the most expensive sets in the vial. All of these cards would come with a considerable price tag. Before we move on, let's have a quick shout out for Scrap Dragon. This level 8 Earth Dragon Synchro monster had the effect where, once per turn, you can select one card you control and one card your opponent controls, destroy them. It has another effect that includes special summoning scrap monsters. but no one really played scrap monsters, so we're just going to focus on that first part of the effect. Summoning a big beat stick on your field and then being able to destroy your own cards to get rid of your opponent's cards was actually a pretty decent effect. In fact, I'd say Scrap Dragon probably helped popularise the further use of continuous cards such as Fiendish Chain. You could Fiendish Chain your opponent's monster, then summon your Scrap Dragon, and then just pop your own Fiendish Chain to pop either that monster or one of your opponent's back row. Scrap Dragon was a pretty versatile card for its time, and saw use for many years. As for the August YCS, Indianapolis would show us that the more things change, the more they stay the same. This anti-meta build by Anthony Meyer contains pretty much no new cards. In fact, if you wanted to, you could take this exact build and play it in Edison Format, as every card featured in the main and extra deck were released before April 2010. 2010 overall has proven to be the year with the FISE tournament formats. Whoever thought that something like this, just your anti-meta good cards deck, would be able to take a YCS? For innovators, creative deck builders, and even combo players, 2010 has been a pretty nice year, in all honesty. The key card of this build would be Banish of the Radiance, as it hurt pretty much every meta deck. In particular, by banishing cards, X-Sabers couldn't use their Dark Souls, and plant decks couldn't really use their Dandelions or Spores. It would pretty much just stop every deck going at that time. September 2010 would bring about the biannual Forbidden Unlimited list, and unlike last time, there's been quite a few bannings. Rescue Cat, Substitute, Brain Control, Heavy Storm, and Temple of the Kings from Structure Deck Marek have all been forbidden. Rescue Cat I suppose we could have seen coming, especially considering how powerful it was in X-Sabers and any other deck that could utilise beast monsters. Substitute was totally deserved for what it did at Worlds. Brain Control was... well, the card was kinda sacky. If Mind Control was at 1, then this definitely had to be banned. Heavy Storm getting banned, I'd imagine would have been quite controversial at the time. And Temple of the Kings just had to be banned because you could not have a spell card with a Mercurial Destructive effect legal in the game. The only reason it was playable in the first place is because they just had to get it out there. In Limited, we would see Black Whirlwind and Infinity Launcher go to 1 each to slow down their respective decks. Royal Oppression would also go to 1 because the card was just so widely used. And we would see the return of Monster Reborn and Dark Hole, as both cards were taken away from Forbidden. Semi-limited, we would see Chaos Sorcerer, Mystical Space Typhoon, Snipe Hunter, Magical Cylinder, and Ojama Trio all move up. Duelist, Tiger King of the Ice Barrier would also be put into semi-limited. Unlimited altogether would be Goblin Zombie, Black Rose Dragon, Cyber Dragon, Treeborn Frog, Royal Decree, and United We Stand. As is often the case with new formats, it's the easy to play stuff that kicks off the fastest. Angel Flores would take YCS San Jose with his Gemini Hero build. This stun deck would be focused around the card Gemini Spark. Tribute 1 face-up level 4 Gemini monster you control to target 1 card on the field, destroy it and draw 1 card. With Elemental Hero Neos Alias being arguably the best hero monster at this time besides Stratos, building a deck around this card was very easy to do. We would see the meta develop a bit moving into October as YCS Philadelphia would be taken by Plant Synchro. The key card in this deck would be the Breeze Dragon, a card I stupidly overlooked when covering Crimson Crisis. This level 4 Wind Dragon Tuner monster has 1000 attack and 2000 defense. When this card is normal summoned, you can special summon 1 monster with 500 or less attack from your graveyard and attack position. That monster's effects is negated. This card cannot be used as a Synchro material monster, except for the Synchro summon of a Dragon type Synchro monster. The other Synchro material monsters cannot be level 4. The Breeze Dragon was a little slow, but its effect was perfectly suited to a grind game. Summoning it after you'd gone through your Dandelions and Raikos was a good way to put yourself in a strong position, as it gave you immediate access to the likes of Bionic and Black Rose Dragon. Plant Synchro wasn't quite there as a deck just yet, but going into 2011 it'd be a force to be reckoned with as it receives additional support. That additional support could be found in November's Starstrike Blast thanks to the inclusion of Glow Up Bulb. This level 1 Earth Plant Tuner monster with 100 attack and 100 defense had the following effect. You can send the top card of your deck to the graveyard and special summon this card from the graveyard. Each player can only use the effect of Glow Up Bulb once per duel. Glow Up Bulb may have been a once per duel card, but that once per duel use was absolutely going to count every time. especially as Starstrike Blast would also include the level 2 tuner Synchro monster, Formula Synchron. Starstrike Blast on the whole would be an excellent set for both present and future decks, and is arguably one of the greatest sets ever made if you like sidecards. Different Dimension Ground, Draw and Lockbird, Skullmeister, Sideblocker, Heatwave, Vanity's Emptiness, these have all been very good side deck options depending on format. Skullmeister has seen more use in the last 2 years than it had in its first 8, and Draw and Lockbird is one of the most used cards in the game today. Moving into November though, Starstrike Blast would have very little effect on the decks to beat, as YCS Atlanta would see 3 of the top 4 spots taken by Gravekeepers. There wasn't really any secret sauce to Gravekeepers decks, you just played it straight. You played the main engine cards such as Spy and Recruiter, you then played your main aggro cards in Ascendant and Assailant, and finally you played your Commandant to search your Necro Valleys. Once the gang was all together, you could then empty your opponent's hand with Royal Tribute. The only thing in this deck that I'd say was particularly spicy is the inclusion of Malefic Stardust Dragon in the extra deck. The Malefics were a series of cards printed to coincide with the release of the Bound Beyond Time movie. In the case of Malefic Stardust Dragon, you could special summon it from your hand by banishing a Stardust Dragon from your extra deck as long as you control the face-up field spell. As Gravekeepers were running Necrophally anyway, it didn't hurt to have these Malefic cards in the side. Alternatively, some Gravekeeper decks would choose to run Malefic Cyber End Dragon in the side as a beta. Finishing 2011 off would be the release of Hidden Arsenal 3. Depending on how you look at it, this set would either be more or less impactful than 2. It would be more relevant in the sense that it brought more archetypes up to meta play, such as Dragoonities, but it would be less meta relevant in the fact that there wasn't anything in there as powerful as Naturia Beast. Naturia Barkion would be pretty close to Beast. While this card is face up on the field, you can remove from play 2 cards in your graveyard to negate the activation of a trap card and destroy it. Not as good as Beast, but they were ran together for more or less the same reason. It was just a way to shut off more of your opponent's back row and lock them into only using monster effects. One tech card I want to mention from this set for a moment is Ally of Justice Cycle Reader. This level 3 Dark Machine Tuner monster had the effect where you can discard this card to the graveyard to select up to 2 light monsters in your opponent's graveyard and remove them from play. This effect can be activated during either player's turn. Against light decks, this was basically DD Crow on steroids. It's not seen as much play as DD Crow has for obvious reasons, but the card will always come in and out of play depending on format. Thanks to the rather large number of light decks that have appeared over the last couple of years, Cycle Reader has seen a lot of side play in modern formats. And that is it for 2010. It's been quite a intriguing year for Yu-Gi-Oh! Whereas the previous years have seen the game on a rather hard upwards trajectory of power creep, 2010 just kinda evened things out a little bit. Don't get me wrong, there were still quite a lot of power cards, but the pace of the game was a lot more reasonable. And had you left the game during the GX era or those early 5Ds years, this would have been a good time to drop back in, as the slower pace made it very easy to comprehend and get back up to speed. I myself am currently in the process of building an Edison deck, and I'm looking forward to getting into that format. Hopefully this video can go on to encourage others to do the same. Join us next time for 2011, a year where the game goes through yet another set of radical changes. See ya.